You want me to stand off to the side?
You can stand off the side here and I'll just... Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to this Fall 2014 President's Convocation. We're very glad that you're here. We're especially glad for some special guests. I'd like to, at this time, recognize a few of the many guests that we have here. First of all, the wife of our Convocation speaker, Ms. Marie Stevens, my wife, Dr. Connie Blanchard, and we're especially pleased to have from Korea two of our good friends who are here representing the Rosalind Carter Institute in Korea, Dr. Cho and Dr. Kim. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Sarah Spear, as you may know, is our new Director of International Programs, and thank her for all her work in making today's events possible. This is a special occasion for a number of reasons, but perhaps primarily because this is the first in a continuing series of activities that are connected with the Quality Enhancement Plan. I think probably most of you are aware, you know what Windows to the World means now, right? And you know that there will be these events that you will be attending over the years that you're here. This is the first, and so in a way you're privileged to be part of this event today. This is also a special day in that we have an outstanding scholar and anthropologist as our speaker. Dr. Phillips Stevens is professor of anthropology at the State University of New York in Buffalo, where he has taught since 1971. He did his undergraduate work at Yale, and from there went to work in West Africa with the Peace Corps. It was his experience there that drew him into anthropology, so he returned to the States and completed a PhD in anthropology at Northwestern University. Since then, Dr. Stevens has conducted extensive research in Africa, published widely, and established a reputation as one of anthropology's foremost experts on West Africa. He's been recognized on many occasions for his research, his teaching, and his contributions to the groups with whom he has worked. Most recently, the King of Essie in Nigeria conferred upon him a chieftaincy title in recognition of the work he did there in the 1960s. I should also note that Phil Stevens and I have been friends for over 40 years. He and I were instrumental in the founding of the Association for the Anthropological Study of Play back in the early 1970s, and since then we've had the opportunity to work and travel together on various occasions. So, at this point, it is my privilege to welcome to the podium our Fall 2014 President's Convocation speaker, my friend, Dr. Phillips Stevens.
It's a great honor. My wife, Marie, and I thank you all. We thank the Blanchards for this great honor for selecting me to be his convocation speaker in his final year with you. I also thank Sarah Spear, who's been corresponding with me for several weeks prior to this event. Added to the thrill of being here was dinner last night with Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, and that was a great experience. So I want to share with you a very quick overview of some of the major complexes of early African art. This is based on two things. One, Dr. Blanchard's desire to emphasize Africa in his Windows on the World idea, and because Africa today gets a bum rap. Much of the news out of Africa is pretty grim. Africa, since the colonial era, has displayed more problems than successes. But in fact, this is a rich and fascinating continent, rich in cultural diversity and in mineral resources. And any introduction to African studies, any introduction to Africa as a theme for study, I think, should begin with some evidence of the glorious past of much of tropical Africa, African cultures. We're going to go back to 1,500 years before the Common Era, and we're going to come up to the last century before the colonial period of the 18th and 19th centuries. Evidence for highly developed, highly sophisticated civilizations in tropical Africa, below the Sahara, are found in these artistic remains. Archaeology is problematic in much of tropical Africa because of the acidity of the soil and because most architecture was constructed of mud. And when people leave a dwelling or a town, the town quickly dissolves, and architecturally, perhaps some signs are visible from the air, but not much can be discovered archaeologically. And the acidity of the soil and the humidity of the conditions in the forested areas render decomposition of organic materials very rapid. But some of these great civilizations of early, the first millennium of the Common Era produced highly sophisticated artistic traditions. We're going to look at terracotta and brass and stone. We're going to conclude with the work I did in Nigeria that Dr. Blanchard referred to. My title was A Great African Mystery, but I have changed the title a little bit to speak of the greatest African mystery, which is the one I'm going to conclude with. Art, highly sophisticated art, like what I'm going to present to you in a very quick overview, reveals an awful lot about the society that produced it. First, as I was saying to Professor Wynn's class this morning, art is an extra. It is not part of subsistence, survival, protection, shelter, the basic needs of people. To produce art indicates a separate realm of cultural need. Very sophisticated art requires time and skill. And if a person is going to give time and develop the skills needed to produce such fine sculpture, that person has to be supported. Someone else has to do the farming, the hunting, the fishing, the construction, the weaving, and so on, that allows him or her to engage full-time in this specialization. And so what we have here is evidence for highly stratified, centralized, and specialized societies in sub-Saharan Africa beginning 1,500 years before the Common Era. Let me see if electronic technology was never one of my greatest skills. So if I falter here, I apologize in advance. We're going into, I'm going to have to turn a little bit. We're going into this area, which is now Nigeria. That's coincidental that we're talking about what became Nigeria toward the end of the 19th century. And in this area, there were highly developed civilizations that owed their existence largely to their control of the north-south trade, the trans-Saharan trade, which was flourishing in a good millennium before the Common Era and throughout the first millennium of the Common Era. Islam was developed in the 8th century, and Islam rapidly came across the Sahara, bringing writing with it by the 8th century. These trade routes across the Sahara from the Mediterranean into the tropical areas were well established by the time these artistic complexes develop. Terracotta, which we'll talk about first, in the culture of the so-called Nok civilization, subsequent to the discovery of the Nok, named for a small village in northern Nigeria where the first item was discovered. There have been found 2 other major complexes of terracotta sculpture named for the largest towns in their area, Sokoto and Katsina. Katsina is way up in the north of Nigeria on the border of Niger. The Nok culture occupies this area. This is the Niger Delta, the Atlantic Ocean, the Niger and Benue rivers. All of this area covers the region in which these very fine terracotta sculptures were uncovered. The first of them were discovered in tin mines, and there were tin mines off the edge of the plateau at the southern edge of this area for a long, long time before Europeans came. And tin is a component of bronze, and so that may be the source of the bronze that we're going to get to later. It's obvious that pottery is a precursor to terracotta sculpture, and pottery traditions are very, very old, thousands of years old, and to transition from making a pot with very thin walls to making a sculpture, a hollow sculpture, is a fairly direct transition. These objects still are representative of a highly skilled tradition, a specialized tradition requiring strong social supports. An elephant also in the Nok. You can look up all these names on Google, on your internet browser, and you'll find lots and lots of pictures. These are just a few. I'm going to jump 1,500 or 2,000 years into the modern era to the ancient capital of the spiritual capital of the Yoruba people, Y-O-R-U-B-A, called Ife. The Yoruba were and are an extensive series of highly stratified kingdoms. They are important to me as an anthropologist because they are the most productive, artistically productive culture in all of Africa, and they are the single most influential African cultural influence in the New World, brought over by the slave trade. Yoruba really dominate in the African-based cultures of Brazil, Caribbean, and southeastern U.S. Ife is, I have to turn this way, right here on our map. Now, bronze casting. Professor Wynn's class knows about the lost wax method. I don't have time here to explain it to you, but there are a huge number of very fine brass or bronze objects made in Benin from the 12th century to the 14th century, roughly. They've been dated by carbon means because of some carbon residue is left after firing. And this is a complicated, time-consuming, and very, very delicate process. To make one item takes many, many weeks. And if one is not careful, and if the molding of the wax or the pouring of the metal, or earlier stages as well, the molding of the clay over the wax model. If any of those have been done imperfectly, the final product is going to be imperfect. And the mold can never be used again. It has to be broken to get the cast brass item out. So this was a highly skilled, full-time specialization in ancient Ife, and the quantity of objects that were produced by the Ife artisans shows that there were a lot of them. There was a whole school, a whole guild, perhaps, of royal artisans. They were supported by the king, and most of the work that's produced is for royal ceremony to commemorate the royal ancestors, or for royal ceremonies, or both. This is a mask called the Mask of Obalufon, and that may or may not be exactly what it represents. It was made to be worn as a mask. You can see there are eye slits here for the wearer to see out of, and little holes around the beard and hairline. Perhaps beads were inserted in there, hanging down to represent hair and beard. That's more than a speculation, because in some of these holes, little black beads were found. And there was also a glass bead industry in ancient Ife. This is one of many heads of kings for the royal palace, cast in brass or bronze. These are all in the collection of the Ife Museum now. I will go quickly through them. This is a queen mother, perhaps, or a representation of the goddess Oloku, who is the goddess of watery places. There's some speculation about what this figure actually represents, but it is almost certainly female. Terracotta tradition in the same style as the brass. This is a very fine thing. It's actually very small, about the size of my fist, with a tapered neck, designed to be a bottle stopper, or perhaps a stopper for a wine or oil bottle. The terracotta sculpture of a king. This was going to be, or had been at one time, life-size, maybe the largest terracotta anywhere in Africa. The rest of it hasn't been located, so we just have the feet of a person sitting astride a royal stool, and we know that because no other person than the king can sit on a stool like this, with this loop here. His feet are on a four-legged stool under the loop. That loop is of unknown purpose, but this was an incredible piece of terracotta sculpture, which was in the royal palace. Excavations showed this potsherd pavement. The ceremonial grounds, the ritual grounds inside the palace were paved with this regular pattern of different colored potsherds. We're going to jump to Benin, the headquarters of the Edo, E-D-O, people who are neighbors of the Yoruba and share a lot of cultural and linguistic similarities. Benin is another great producer of brass or bronze art sculpture cast by the lost wax process. This all came to Western knowledge, European knowledge, as a result of the British punitive expedition of 1897. The Edo, or Bini as the British called them, were not happy with the British presence, and were not as docile as the British would like, and they resisted, and so the British launched a punitive expedition. A massive force sacked the administrative centers of the city, including the palace. Here is, before we get to that picture, a map to locate Benin right here, called Benin City on this map. And this is a photograph taken in 1897 of some of the punitive expedition who have sacked the palace and taken hundreds, and I mean 400 or 500 of these highly skilled brass plaques, commemorative plaques, which were made to hang on a wall and display important incidents in royal history or in mythology. And they hung around the walls of the ritual chambers in the king's palace. I'll show you some of them. There are hundreds still in the British Museum where they were taken by the punitive expedition. This is, in my experience anyway, the best known of Benin kings. This is Oba. Oba means king, Akenzua II. Who died in 1978. He was king in the 1950s and 1960s when I first went to Nigeria. He was educated at the University of London, a very educated, very skilled diplomat, and he's shown here wearing the regalia of the king, a heavy costume of coral. It's all coral from the sea. The coral hangings and lots of medallions and so forth hanging from his belt, from his strings around his chest, and a heavy coral headdress. This is what he wears when he's out in ceremony, and this provides the model for much of Benin royal art, which show an Oba and his attendants. This is one of those plaques I was referring to, cast in the lost wax process, cast in one piece, showing incredible skill. This is one of the famous Benin heads. There are a couple of dozen of these, and many of them are in the world's museums. There are a few in the US and a few in Europe, and several in the museum at Benin. A head of a king. When a king dies, a head is made for the royal altar, the altar to the royal ancestors. And here is a picture of the reconstructed ceremonial room built in the 20th century after the British destroyed it, and the altars to the spirits of deceased kings are reconstructed here. And in the top of each of the heads, there's inserted an elaborate carved elephant tusk. And here is just one wall showing some of the shrines to Benin kings. This is a small one off to the side, maybe a king, maybe a noble person, showing a brass or bronze group. I don't know whether that was cast in one piece or not. It looks incredible if it was, but in any case, it's a very intricate casting. This is an active shrine when this picture was taken back in the 1950s. And a head of a woman, perhaps a queen mother. On the forehead, there are frequently two marks, an example of certain types of African tribal marks, and these were usually inlaid with something on sculptures, maybe ivory, or on ivory sculptures that was inlaid with strips of iron. Two leopards that were cast in Benin City and presented to the Queen of England at Nigerian independence in 1960, and two leopards made from ivory, made in many different pieces, put together with very intricate interlocking joints. One of these sculptures in ivory, one of about three that I know of, it has those two marks on the forehead where little strips of metal had been inserted. It was worn by a king. This is a small thing. It's about 6 to 7 inches long, made to hang from the hip or the breast of the king's garments. A couple more of these plaques. Some of them are in very high relief, all of them cast in one piece. This is a goat, perhaps a sacrificial goat, or perhaps going to be a meal for a feast. being carried by young boys, apparently. And this is in full relief. This was an incredibly complex casting. And this vase, certainly cast in one piece, a beautiful example of Benin art. And remember, one mistake and it's gone. Each item is unique. Moving to two little islands on the Niger River, both of which I visited a couple of times when I was in the Peace Corps. I went as a teacher of English, but I spent a year and a half working for the Nigerian government in their museums department, and I went and made reports on the condition of the bronze, the famous bronze figures found on these islands. The islands are right here on the Niger River. In fact, Djeba is the site of the first and most important bridge over the Niger. These are the the castings that were found in a little sacred hut in the island of Tada. They were not made there, they were brought there. There's only legends that say how they got there. There are animals and human forms. The most famous of them all is the seated Tada bronze, as he is called. He is certainly Ife in his style. If he came from Ife, why and how? And there were others. There are ostriches, 2 ostriches. And inside the sacred hut is this little character who was always clothed because he was a sacred power symbol, as he's sometimes called. All of these were brought to Lagos because they were in serious danger in that little island. They are a great African mystery. This is a detail of the standing Tada figure. Very complex man with lots of beadwork and decorative and symbolic insignia on his body. This is the Djeba woman, very finely sculpted from her waist up. From her waist down, her legs are simply stalks, which suggests that maybe she was dressed, maybe she had a wrapper. Her legs were not meant to be seen. And she was accompanied by a male figure, which in the 1950s was attacked by a madman and damaged, and was taken away by the British colonial administrators to London, and it is still today in the British Museum. It's called the Djeba Bowman, and it has a bow on its back. You can look that up, Djeba Bowman. This too was removed from Djeba. Its presence there is a real mystery. It does not resemble any of the other stylistic or the main features of any of the other stylistic complexes. So its origin is truly mysterious. Owo, I just have one slide from Owo. This is intermediary between Ife and Benin, but it was a kingdom itself. I can't find, there it is. This is Owo right here. And Owo was intermediary. In fact, the legends of the establishment of Owo indicate that it was meant to be an intermediary between the powerful kingdoms of the Yoruba and to the west and the Edo to the east. And it demonstrated and influenced art styles from both cultures. This is an Owo terracotta sculpture, one of many hundreds. This one shows a bit of humor. The Owo art is known for a series of ram heads. I don't have any pictures of them, but they were ancestral. The ram is symbolic of power, male power. And lots of ancestral shrines in Owo had these ram's heads. This is an elephant in terracotta, which was actually discovered in Ife, but is presumed to have come from Owo. I'm going to jump to a complex called Lower Niger, for want of a better label. It is still called Lower Niger, and we're referring to this area down here. The most famous of the Lower Niger bronze sites was Igbo Ukwu, I-G-B-O, Igbo Ukwu. Igbo means a heavily forested place, and Ukwu was the name of the owner. Igbo Ukwu is right here. And a treasure trove of items was accidentally uncovered by a farmer in the 1940s, and Professor Thurston Shaw of Oxford was the first to, and conducted the most extensive excavations. Thurston Shaw just died last year in Oxford. And his excavations and the analyses of the objects recovered suggested that they were a burial for perhaps a king. There is no tradition of kingship in this area now, today. In modern times, the Igbo people are really kind of egalitarian tribe without highly centralized authority systems. And so this is a very early manifestation of some kind of nobility. And the reconstruction shows the corpse of a noble person being buried in a seated position in a typical African burial, with the body completely isolated from the earth. A chamber is constructed under the ground. Now I say typical African. This is found in some places in Africa. It was found in the area where I went back to do my dissertation research, quite far from here, so I'm calling it African. And a lot of other cultures use this, but it's not universal. In any case, a chamber is constructed, and here you see the noble person or king or whatever he is seated with various accoutrements, and then a wooden chamber is built before the earth is poured back in. Here are people up here looking down into the grave. That's presumed to be what is represented. This is one of the most famous of the Lower Niger bronze objects. People are very familiar now with the ancient method of cire perdue, or lost wax casting, but how this was cast was a real mystery, because if it were cast all in one piece, it would be almost miraculous to construct a vase like this with this web of knotted ropes around it. It was taken to London and x-rayed, and it was found indeed that the ropes were cast separately and fixed onto the sides of the vase in such tight joints that they were not visible except through x-ray. It's a remarkable piece of work. This is a puzzle, real puzzle, found at Igbo Ukwu. It represents 2 eggs, but they are really female breasts, both eggs and breasts, and a special bird is sculpted between them. And hanging from these 2 pendulous breasts are these links of iron chain with crotals, or little open bells like jingle bells at the ends, and some glass beads on the chains. This is a remarkable piece of work, and its purpose is pretty unknown. It's not at all certain what this was made for. But breasts and eggs are universally associated with femaleness, with reproduction, with fertility, with life, generation, and maintenance of life. And so that's likely. And then this bird, which is unknown exactly, but there are certain birds that are associated with this concept in African traditions, suggest that that's what's going on here. A snail shell vase from Igbo Ukwu. Okay, I'm going to call this the greatest mystery of all, and I haven't saved myself very much time to cover it. In 1965, I was sent by the Director of Antiquities to Esie, E-S-I-E. Every vowel is pronounced in African words. This is Esie. Esie. It's Yoruba is a tonal language, and so we go up on the E's, Esie. And in this village, in 1937, a British school teacher came upon, here is SCA, let's see if I can locate it right up here. Sorry, here we are, right here. Came upon a remarkable site in a sacred grove about a mile from the village. There was a collection of about 1,000 carved soapstone images of people, men, women, children, and some animals. They were ranged from about 8 inches to nearly 3 feet, carved from talc schist or soapstone. Engaged in all kinds of activities. Some were simply sitting, some were standing, some were armed with spears, bows and arrows, and or daggers. There were at least a couple are holding identifiable blacksmith tools. Some were eating, some were playing musical instruments, some were laughing, some were very somber. They were arranged in a rough semicircle around a central figure. This is the first image, not very clear, taken in 1937, and through the 1930s, the images were brought to the world's attention. They had become this focus of a cult. This is one of the priests of the cult standing, speaking his words of salutation to the image the people designated as the king. Because he's somewhat larger than the others, he was in the center of this semicircle, and they focused on him. And this is another picture of the chief priest prostrating before the king, who was over here, this dark figure, darkened from the blood of sacrifices. Here's a closer picture of the image they call the king. They are sunk into the ground from their own weight. They've been there a long time. During my work there, I developed the hypothesis that the stone these images were carved from does not come from that area. There are other known sources of this kind of stone, and one of them just happens to be the ancient kingdom of Oyo, which was the headquarters of all the Yoruba people, right up here. It was sacked by raiders from the north in the 1830s. There were a series of raids before the final demolition of the city. And my speculation is that these images came from Oyo. They were carried to their present place near the village of Esie by people fleeing Oyo. There was lots of intertribal migration during this turbulent time in the early 19th century. And the visitors came and stayed there for a while. Archaeology has revealed some signs of habitation where the images are, but for some reason they left, presumably with the intention to come back, and they never did. The people of the Esie town came later and found the images there and developed their stories about the origin of the images and the cult of the images. The images were said to be the petrified remains of visitors from another land who were turned to stone for a variety of reasons. But even as stone, they are capable of great works and great mischief. And so they needed to be accommodated and recognized. In 1945, a shelter was built to protect the images from any further damage. They were pulled out of the ground and placed on shelves in this building. which I came upon 20 years later, 1965. The building was falling down. Images were being damaged because of the settling of the building itself. The members of the cult who conducted an annual festival for the images at the beginning of the rainy season, the end of March, they would move the images so they could sit, and some of them to make more space. The king was the focus of their attention. Here are some women kneeling before the image of the king. These pictures were taken in 1965 by me. And the chief priest, who is at this time is a woman, a priestess of the cult, has cast kola nut to, in a process of divination, to determine the king's response to their supplications. And the images were in great danger of further deterioration. A lot of them had been stolen already, and this was a huge African mystery that of some very fine quality stone carving that needed to be preserved. So this is me and a architect conducting the first measurements for a new museum. Some of the headless torsos laid out for numbering. In 1966, when I left, the museum complex looked like this. And this is the exhibition gallery where some of the finer pieces were put on exhibit. Here I am with the largest of them, who is in the center of the exhibition. We reconstructed parts of him, and he is nearly 3 feet high, and is very heavy, close to over 250 pounds. And this is another scene of the exhibition gallery. The king and some of his attendants were positioned outside in a external altar where the festival could continue. The torsos and images too badly damaged for exhibition were put into a separate building, which was a storeroom. And here I am in the 1970s, so this was, I think, 1974 or 1976. I went back both years to get better pictures and do some more research for the publication of this book, which is my contribution to your library. This was published in 1978, The Stone Images of SCA, Nigeria. Every one of the identifiable images and interesting fragments are photographed in this book. It's not bedtime reading. And the first 5 chapters are the whole story of the images. I will give it to your library. Here are some individual pictures of some of the finer of the images that we were able to reconstruct, including some whose heads we could never find, but they have very interesting accoutrements, weaponry and tools and so forth, showing a common gesture of the right hand over the left breast, over the heart, which is probably a gesture of greeting, a gesture of peace between two people. In June of 2012, the king of the town, he was now called a king, the museum and my book had brought a lot of people and some prosperity to the town. The king came to Baltimore to visit his daughter, who lives there permanently. I flew down to Baltimore to meet him. Here we are at the Baltimore waterfront. And he proposed to invite me to come and join the celebration of his 25th anniversary on the throne, and to receive an honorary chieftaincy title for my work, which I did. One of the greatest thrills of my life. I must confess to you that another of the greatest thrills of my life was having dinner with Jimmy Carter last night. These are some pictures of SCA taken on a Sunday. The largest buildings in the town are the Catholic Cathedral of St. Michael's, which is the headquarters of the diocese of that area, and the mosque, the main mosque of the town. The population who are not traditional still, and there are very few of them who are traditional, are about 50% Christian and about 50% Muslim, and it matters not. They are a model for Christian-Muslim relations, which I wish all the rest of Africa could witness. One of the days of the celebration of the king's anniversary was a special service conducted by the bishop. Very moving. You can hear it in my voice. This is the king's house, decorated for the event. This is the way the museum complex looks today. Three more buildings were constructed. The original site of the images has grown up again. The sacred grove has reconstructed itself from the roots of the same sacred trees that were planted there many decades earlier. These are some scenes from the celebration, the tents that were set up to honor visitors and those who were receiving chieftaincy titles. I was given 2 suits of clothes. Here I am in one of them that was made for me by some friends of mine, and my title is embroidered on the cap. This is the one I wore during my the conferral ceremony. The King of Essia is to my right, left of the screen, and on the right of this picture is a local ruler from another town. I was led up to the king when it was my turn by members of the museum staff and the Department of Museums and Monuments of the federal government. I was put in a chair and my head was bared. The king conferred the title on me with some words, and the cap embroidered in sequins with my title. He also gave me a plastic necklace and bracelet in pink, representing the ancient pink coral beads that royalty wore, but there isn't any more of that around. And 2 sprigs of sacred leaves which were thrust up behind my ear and under my cap, and I was led back, transformed, a new person, back into society in a dance. Thank you very much, Dr. Blanchard, and thank you all very much.